Welcome to the SNN.Network Canada virtual event. I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Chris Cito, CEO at Spectral Medical. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, and good morning, all. I'm Chris Cito, CEO of Spectral, and with me as well, co-presenting is Dr. John Kellum, our Chief Medical Officer. So let me just give a little bit of a background into Spectral Medical. Spectral Medical is a clinical stage medical device company developing products for the treatment of significant critical care needs, and this is specifically in the areas of septic shock and kidney disease. On the sepsis side, Spectral is committed to addressing unmet needs in the treatment of what's called endotoxemic septic shock. And we have two products, sepsis diagnostic EAA and its companion septic shock therapeutic PMX cartridge. This really is precision treatment utilizing a diagnostic EAA and PMX therapeutic device. It's a fairly large market. Our addressable U.S. market is about $1.5 billion US dollars per annum. There is no FDA-approved solution in the market, so Spectral has no competitor today, and Dr. Kellum can talk a little bit about that. Now, we are, what we believe, running a de-risk Phase 3 FDA confirmatory trial. And once again, Dr. Kellum can get into the trial design around that and why we believe it is a de-risk trial at this point in time. From a commercialization perspective, we've also de-risked the story. In February of 2020, we entered into an exclusive distribution agreement with Baxter. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. We also have a wholly owned subsidiary called Dialco Medical, which is in the dialysis console market. Our devices address patient needs across the dialysis spectrum for both acute and chronic dialysis. And really, it removes operational complexity from dialysis treatments for both patients and providers, which has really been the barrier to home dialysis in the past. The addressable U.S. market is anticipated to grow to about $5.5 billion US dollars by 2025. It's an interesting model. You could call it the razor blade model. It's a recurring revenue model with an installed device and consumables. Our SAMI device is targeting the acute market, which is dialysis in the ICU. It has been FDA cleared and Health Canada approved since 2018. On the chronic market side, we have our DIMI device. So this is dialysis in clinics, skilled nursing facilities, and in home. So we have Health Canada approval for use in all settings. We received that early this year. And we're FDA cleared for use in hospital and clinical settings. And we are progressing on our FDA regulatory path for in-home use. So we have to run basically what we call a usability trial at the end of the day. And Dr. Kellum can get into a little bit of that design and timing around that. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Kellum.
Thanks, Chris. And I'll try to deal with things this last way. So, sort of to start with the story, I think, if you're not familiar, sepsis is a dysregulated inflammatory response to infection, and it affects about 1.5 million patients in the United States each year. It's potentially lethal condition, and pretty much anyone who dies of, say, pneumonia or infection after surgery and dying from sepsis. However, the mortality rate is highly variable. About 20% of patients develop what we call septic shock. They have a profound loss of blood pressure. And about half of those patients, or about 100 to 150,000 patients per year in the United States, the cause of this shock is a molecule on the bacterial cell membrane called endotoxin. Next slide. So endotoxin was discovered many years ago, but it's tricky to measure in patients, most of it because it's inside of cells. We have the only FDA-approved device for measuring endotoxin called EAA, and so we can identify patients who have high levels of endotoxin in their bloodstream. And you really can't diagnose endotoxic septic shock without this test. So then polymyxin, or PMX, is an old antibiotic which has been known to bind endotoxin and is also but is also very toxic. And we don't use it clinically except in last resort. However, if you bind the PMX to a membrane similar to a dialysis filter, you can actually remove endotoxin from the bloodstream without exposing patients to the toxicity of the molecule. PMX has been used in other countries for many years. There's been over 10,000 patients in clinical trials. It has an adverse event rate of less than 0.1%. Our initial regulatory trial, the EUPHRATES trial, was negative, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But working with the FDA, we found a subgroup of patients that benefited from the therapy, and it gives us a clear regulatory pathway for PMX. Our current trial, the TIGRIS trial, is designed to confirm this finding. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of companies out there working in this space. Blood purification has become a bit of a hot topic in recent years due to COVID primarily. We have the only technology, as this table shows, that's really for sepsis. And none of the other companies are really pursuing sepsis approval in the U.S. market, despite the fact that they do talk about it quite a lot. Our diagnostic also sets us apart from these other companies because we can identify exactly the correct patient for the therapy. Next slide. The other big advantage we have for PMX is it's a known commodity. There's enormous experience with the product, and we know that it removes endotoxin and that it is safe. The efficacy requirements for the FDA clearance in the United States are restricted to improving survival. However, we're well positioned for this, not just from the literature, but from our prior studies. So if you go to the next slide. The EUPHRATES trial was conducted some years ago now, and while the top-line data did not demonstrate a mortality benefit, it did show cardiovascular improvements for PMX. And then working with the FDA in a post-hoc analysis, we identified a subset of patients who benefited in terms of mortality. When you select patients on the basis of severity of illness using organ severity, a score like the MOD score, and endotoxin levels that are between 0.6 and 0.9, you find that there's a dramatic improvement in mortality, about a 30% relative risk reduction in mortality at 28 days. The discovery of this subset of patients really comes from the fact that patients that have levels of endotoxin, of EAA, greater than 0.89 or 0.9 or greater, really have so much endotoxin in their bloodstream with this 17% or so of patients that they're just not addressable by the therapy. If you take those patients out, you find that there's a very significant improvement in mortality, and that's what the current trial is designed to confirm. Next slide. This is the study design of the TIGRIS trial, and it really is a novel design. The FDA doesn't normally approve these kinds of trials, so this is, I think, in part testament to the belief that the results of the prior trial were quite robust. So the trial design essentially is it's an open label study and 2-to-1 randomization, so 2 patients will receive therapy for every 1 patient that is a control. It allows the combination of the new data with a portion of the patients who met these criteria in the prior study. So we're moving essentially 179 patients from the prior study into the EUPHRATES trial. Now, you weight that a little bit differently. The prior population is weighted at 75%, whereas the new patients are obviously weighted at 100%. And this allows us to essentially demonstrate the efficacy of the product using a trial that's much smaller, a new trial that's much smaller, only 150 patients. Next slide. And this gets us to our timeline. So right now we've enrolled 27 patients so far, so about 30% of about 20% of our sample size. We have some uncertainty around the timeline given COVID, obviously, but we do anticipate hitting the 60% mark this summer. The implication of hitting that mark for our strategic partner we'll discuss in a moment, and then we expect a few more months, as it shows for you there, to complete the trial. And I'll just mention, although it's not on this slide, that we now have a full complement of 15 sites. And enrollment is already picking up despite the ongoing pandemic. We have 2 patients in December already, and we're feeling pretty good about the trial given those realities. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about the partnership with Baxter.
Great, thanks, John. So I'd just like to talk about the commercialization partnership that we have with Baxter and what the opportunity potentially means for Spectral at the end of the day. So from a PMX commercialization perspective, we've certainly de-risked the commercialization through an exclusive distribution agreement with Baxter, which we entered into in early February of 2020. And really, the full commercial burden is solely Baxter's responsibility. We have contracted strong commercial terms with initial and milestone payments from Baxter. There's robust minimum quantities and minimum pricing for PMX, as well as robust distribution and economics resulting in approximately 60 to 70% net EBITDA margins to Spectral. And so you can see on the table on the right-hand side potentially what that means based on market penetration on an annual basis. And we believe Baxter is the best commercialization partner. They have approximately 40% market share with their ICU presence and installed critical care devices. And, this should expedite market penetration of PMX well beyond what Spectral could do on its own. And so when we line up, anticipated market penetration with Baxter's market share of 40%, we're looking at somewhere around potentially $200 million in EBITDA contributions to Spectral. So pretty robust economics and, obviously a significant opportunity for this organization. We'll just move on to the Dialco side, and before I pass it back to John, I'll just give a brief background on our strategic priorities at Dialco for the next, call it 2.5 years. And certainly we're focused on several key priorities. On the DIMI side, we are finalizing all FDA regulatory approvals for the DIMI device over the next 12 months or so. And this includes expanded FDA clearance for PD modality and to execute on our usability trial for in-home use. We view these approvals as when events and not if events. We're also working on completing our product portfolio offering, with the last key item being the development of our own bag Dialysate. And this will allow us to maximize total system sales margins, as well as provide us with pricing flexibility in the marketplace. On the SAMI side, our focus is on increasing commercialization of the SAMI device. This includes strengthening the pipeline of tender and RFP activities, and certainly increasing clinical evaluations and clinical awareness. And finally, on the SAMI side, a potential strategic partnership, we're more focused on the distribution side to accelerate market exposure and penetration. So with that, I'll pass it back to John.
Thanks, Chris. So just a few comments about where this product is relative to the competitive landscape. So Dialco has 2 products that are called SAMI and DIMI. This is the SAMI product, and it's really a product for what I would say the ICU and step-down units. It's a device that allows for acute dialysis, in response to acute kidney injury, and so it's essentially competing with Baxter's Prismax and Next Stage System 1. Assay Medical has developed something that's sort of useful for some patients patients in step-down units, but it's not really a tool for for the ICU. Next slide. And then this device really is designed to fill an important niche, I think, in the sense that as clinical practice is sort of evolving toward a more personalized approach to the management of these patients, there's a need to deliver therapy in different environments. So not all patients can remain in the intensive care unit for protracted periods of time, and COVID has really sort of demonstrated that. It's really quite clear that there's a need for some additional diversity in terms of one's ability to provide this therapy. So the ease of training, and as illustrated on this slide, it can actually be done remotely, as it was done in the middle of one of the COVID waves at the University of Michigan, using just iPhones and remote training. Next slide. It has, very high marks in terms of user experience, and it's really been designed to be optimized along this sort of pathway. This is not, new technology. There's most of the innovation that's involved in this particular device is really around the usability, and you'll see how that plays out in terms of the sister device for home use as well. Next slide. So this, what I refer to as the sister device, is really a device that's very, very similar, but it's optimized for a chronic use. Although it can, and it is already approved for in-center use, its primary market really is for home hemodialysis and hemodialysis in skilled nursing facilities. This has become a major market, and that's why you see a lot of other players, Outset, Quanta, and others entering this particular market space. And so, this is probably a $6 or $7 billion market. And this device, because of its simplicity and ease of use, obviously has a tremendous value for that particular market, because patients can learn this device, and it removes some of the complexity that is a barrier for home hemodialysis traditionally. Next slide. So there are additional barriers, though, that I think that the DIMI device also removes. So it's not just the operational complexity, but that also leads to sort of a lack of confidence, both for the patient and the provider, and the interface and ease of use helps in that space as well. In addition, the other companies that are entering this market are really focused on essentially using tap water as a source of water for dialysis, and using reverse osmosis to essentially purify that water. That has some significant limitations in that RO systems do require some degree of renovation, or at least some degree of organization in the home. They require maintenance, and there's added costs. But in addition to that, as I'll show you in a second, there are significant limitations in terms of the quality of water in many parts of the country, and this limits the use of these systems. Next slide. The patient experience with DIMI has been similar to the nursing experience with SAMI. It's quite feasible to learn this technology quite quickly. This is a little feasibility trial that was done in terms of figuring out just how easy it is to use, and we took a number of individuals aged 34 to 83. And essentially a 2-hour training session resulted in all of these individuals being able to understand, how to perform and operate the device. Next slide. this business of whether one should use a premixed dialysate or an on-site generated dialysate using your own tap water is really a clear differentiation between us and the many of our competitors. There are advantages and disadvantages of both approaches. Certainly, the device that uses an RO system, you're not shipping bags of dialysis fluid, around. You're essentially making it online. The problem with that, however, is that again, the water quality has to be good, and although you do have an advantage of having to store and ship less material, you also have to ship and store a lot of chemicals, and there's issues about disinfecting the system, et cetera. So there are clear advantages to having a bagged dialysis system, which is what we have. And I would just point out that the most successful home hemodialysis or home dialysis program in the history of the planet really has been a peritoneal dialysis. And the model there is where the peritoneal dialysis fluid is shipped to the patient and the patient treats it as a drug. They're not making that solution at home. They are effectively getting it shipped to them, and they are managing it that way. And so if there's any question about what's going to succeed, if you look at what's been successful in the past, it's been this model in peritoneal dialysis. Next slide. This just indicates some data on the water quality across the United States, and indicating that there's a lot of parts of the country where water quality is, in terms of the water being very hard, is a real challenge for reverse osmosis systems, and in some places it's just not an option at all. In other places it becomes a problem in terms of breaking down of the system. Next slide. This slide sort of just speaks to the footprint of the consumables, and so it is true that you need a slightly less space if you're going to use an RO system, as shown on the bottom here, but it's not that much less space. So the advantage that you're getting essentially from using the reverse osmosis system is not really that significant, and given all of the other issues that we discussed, it's certainly not going to be an option for many patients. Next slide. This is our overview of our trial. So as Chris pointed out, the DIMI device is already approved for use in center and in skilled nursing facilities and in dialysis centers. And what we're doing, though, with this trial is to sort of unlock sort of the final step here in terms of its value, and that is using it in the home. And so this is a 4-phase trial. It's really a 5-phase trial because the 5th phase is to allow patients to stay on the device once they've completed this process. But the 4 phases of the evaluation are really a run-in phase, a phase where they receive in-center therapy with the device, but it's delivered by dialysis nurses. A 3rd phase where they deliver the therapy themselves under supervision of the dialysis center personnel, and then the final phase where they go home and deliver the therapy by themselves together with their care partners. This is a small study. It's not really an efficacy trial. It's really just a feasibility and usability study, and similar to what's been done with other products that are on the market. 35 evaluable patients, and it will take us about 12 months to complete. We are experiencing some of the similar delays that many other studies are seeing with COVID, and certainly this has been an issue in terms of getting the trial started. However, we've used the delay to our advantage in terms of streamlining many of the procedures that are required for this, and we have a more simple protocol now than we had when we started. So we anticipate that we'll be getting started in Q2 of next year.
Great. Thanks, John. Just to finish up here, some of the key catalysts that we have coming up. Certainly, TIGRIS interim patient enrollment, there is a Baxter milestone payment at that point in time. It's at 60% enrollment, so 90 patients. We expect that somewhere around mid-2022. Last patient enrollment of TIGRIS around late 2022 or end of 2022, and PMX FDA approval somewhere in the first half of 2023. On the DIMI side, we're expecting FDA clearance for DIMI in home use somewhere around early 2023. And then finally, we're in the process and continue to prepare for potential dual listing on a senior U.S. exchange. With that, that is Spectral Medical, ticker symbol EDT on the TSX. Thanks very much, and we'll open it up to some Q&A.
Hi, Chris. Hi, John. I do see that some questions have come in. The first question is, what is the vision for the company for the next 12 months?
Yeah, I'll just quickly take this. I mean, the real vision for the company over the next 12 months is to get through our regulatory programs. We have two major programs that we believe are significantly value enhancing for our shareholders. So the key is to get through in a positive way through our trials. I think, we've disclosed in the past, we're at 27 patients today on our PMX, on our TIGRIS trial. Currently, the preliminary mortality data is exceeding our expectations, so we're pretty pleased where we're at from a data perspective. We just need to get enrollments back on track, which we think will all happen within 2022. And then the usability trial, small trial, really is just a safety trial at the end of the day. Once we get rolling with that, we'll get through that pretty quickly. So those are the two key components and vision for the company going forward.
Thank you for that. The next question is, will PMX be used or offered in Canadian hospitals?
John, do you want to address I guess, the lack of utilization by Canadian hospitals of PMX? Now, PMX is Health Canada approved and has been for some time, but
so I'll comment on that. It was approved before the EUPHRATES trial was conducted, which was conducted both in the United States and in Canada. And given that trial was negative overall, it's even though it's approved, it's not going to be utilized in Canada until our current trial, which confirms that this is effective in a subgroup of patients, a large subgroup of patients, but a subgroup of patients. There's no Canadian hospitals that are going to be using it until that data are available.
Thank you for that color. Those are all the questions we have time for. Chris, please feel free to wrap up with some closing remarks.
Great. Thank you very much. Once again, I think, we have very exciting prospects with our business, both through the Dialco side of the business and PMX. And, I look forward to updating you on the progress as we get both trials either started or back on track. But, we're pretty bullish on the prospects of this business going forward.
That concludes today's presentation, and thank you for tuning in.